So the section I'm going to be talking about is what are ethics committees. We tend to call them IRBs in academia, institutional review boards. But internationally, more often they're referred to as ethics committees, or community boards are frequently called, because they're not an institutional review board, they function more as an ethics committee. And we're going to talk about what their purpose is. Basically, ethics committees vary depending on where they are. Always their primary role is to protect people who are participating in research. So whether it's an institutional review board like we have at UTEP or at Texas Tech or UT Houston, or whether it's a community ethics committee or a community advisory board that is helping people to prepare their research, design their research, recruit participants, and to provide input into that process, it always comes down to their role is to protect not the interests of the researchers, and not the interests of the people paying for the research, but the people who are participating in the research. So who serves on ethics committees? Dr. Bird already mentioned that. Dr. Bird does. Okay, she does, and Dr. Reininger does. Dr. Tamaka does. I don't know who, some other people in the room may serve on ethics committees. But basically, every ethics committee should have, there's a certain makeup that, that tends to define the dynamic of the committee and the interests that they represent. We'd like to say that ethics committee members need to be qualified, and what does that mean? And we would probably, depending on our perspectives, maybe have differing opinions on that. But basically, we need people who have expertise in different areas of research. So what do ethics committees do? Essentially, they provide input into and approve and are responsible for the oversight of a number of different things. Number one being the design. You know, we talked about study design. Dr. Bird mentioned a couple of poorly designed studies or studies that wouldn't pass IRB approval today. But that's one of the things they do is say, all right, you know, that looks like if this is the outcome that you're looking at, this is a reasonable way to go about doing that. And the way you're going to conduct it is done in such a way so that it is, the participants are protected and it is reasonable within what we consider to be ethical conduct. How are you going to recruit your participants? Dr. Bird touched on that in one particular scenario. Ethics committee review of and approval of how to recruit participants is one big factor, but what comes before that? What comes before whether your recruitment ideas get approved? What do you have to think of? Before you say, this is what I want to do as a researcher. Wouldn't you want to ask the people in the community you're working with, what do you think? You know, am I going to get people this way? And Dr. Bird mentioned, you know, that as a researcher, she's been in that position. And I can think of, you know, we all know, those of us who are students, we have colleagues who, you know, they proposed their dissertation work a year or two ago, and for whatever reason, it's been very, very hard. You know, sometimes it was approved and everything was kind of okay as far as the process, but they had trouble getting participants. And sometimes that's unforeseen and nobody could have thought about it any better. But I think sometimes too, if we'd had more community representation, either on the committee or in the planning process, we'd go, oh wow, I hadn't thought of that. You know, that will really help me. Or different techniques to recruit your participants. And again, Ryan, who's not here anymore, but he was talking about, you know, the pharmaceutical trucks driving up and just paying people to. That's not okay. You know, an ethics committee is going to say you can't recruit participants into your research that way. Community considerations. Again, an ethics committee, these are going to be different depending on the community in which we're conducting research and the type of research that we're doing. What's important to the community? Dr. Reininger talked about pregnancy prevention. In some communities, if you design a study, whether, you know, if you wanted, you can have all the best intentions in the world, but if you don't have the buy-in from the community members, you're going to have a tough time carrying out your research.
So about informed consent, we're going to learn the concept of informed consent and discuss the 8 essential elements of informed consent. So first of all, what is informed consent? Well, it's consent to participate that's given by a competent individual. Okay, now that means that You might have people who are not capable of giving informed consent. They might be able to give consent, but it wouldn't be informed. Perhaps they're not capable of understanding because of some, you know, they may have it might be a person with mental retardation to a level that they don't understand. It might be a person who's incapacitated, a person with dementia, a person in a coma, okay? Those people cannot give consent. In those cases, we can receive consent from whoever is, has the legal authority to give consent for them. So usually it's a parent or guardian, or in the case of someone who's hospitalized, it might be a spouse, a partner, you know, whoever has that power of attorney for their medical stuff, you know, can give consent. Now, even if they are, you know, like with kids or people who might not completely understand everything about research, they might be able to sign an assent form. So with kids who are not capable of consenting for themselves, and that's by law, their parents have to consent for them, they may still sign an assent form. And the rule is, if they don't want to do it, we cannot force a child to do anything. You know, only if you're their mom. and mom can't force them to be in a research study. So, you know, we have to be kind of aware of this. But basically, the consent should be given by a competent individual who, number one, has received the necessary information. That means they have to understand everything about this study. And they need to get it in writing as well as verbally. Okay? They need to have understood the information. And there have been studies done where they've had how many of you have ever filled out a consent form for anything? Did you understand it? Did you read it? You know, no, of course not. You know, my doctor gives them to me all the time. I sign them. You know, I sign it. I trust you. Sure, I'll sign it. They've done studies that show that a lot of people who sign consent forms don't really know what they signed. And so there's a real emphasis now on trying to make sure that people understand by, you know, kind of giving them some questions before they sign. Do you understand? What do you think is going to happen? Tell me what you think this is about, you know, so that you really know that they understand. And then after they consider this information, they have arrived at a decision voluntarily without being coerced or intimidated or induced, you know. And so we talked about this actually over the last couple of days. When we give participants incentives to be in our studies, we can't give them too much money. Because if you do, it's really coercive. You're really buying their way into the study. And that's not ethical. So oftentimes the IRB will say, I think that's too much. You know, and if you really believe that you need to give people that much money, you need to actually be able to justify that. So you make sure you keep them as legal documents. That's what they are. On the other hand, consent is not just a legal document. It's an ethical and moral imperative. Okay, so we don't do it just because it keeps us protected and it's legal. We do it to inform people what we're doing, because we don't want another Tuskegee. We don't want that. We want people to be fully informed and to understand what's going on.